Welcome, everybody. Whether it's Friday evening or Friday morning or sometime in between, welcome to everybody to celebrate this award and the awardees. I'm going to start. I'm Karen Monkman. I'm, as of last week, a past president of CIES, and I'm going to introduce Kara Brown, who is our awards chair. She's an associate professor in the Department of Educational Studies at University of South Carolina and is past co-chair of the Language Issues SIG. Her research is on language policy and equity in education in Estonia and the southeastern US. She's served as award chair twice and has done a stellar job. So I'm going to hand it over to her, and she is going to introduce the chair for this particular award, and we'll move on into celebrating the awardees.
Thank you, past President Monkman. How wonderful. It's great to see you all here, and I'm thrilled with these awardees and this session and that it can have a life beyond this Friday. So welcome, everybody. I first want to share a couple of words about the award itself, because it's a historic one. It's really neat that this was the first committee formed. The first award committee was formed to review articles from the Comparative Education Review in 1980. So I don't know if you all knew that you were part of this historic process. The mandate was to review all of the articles published the preceding year for their importance in shaping the field, their analytic merit, policy implications, concern for theoretical constructs, and implications for future research. In 1989, the award was formally renamed the George Bereday Annual Best Comparative Education Review Article Award. With that said, I want to thank very much and introduce the remarkable Bereday Award Chair of the committee, and also thank the committee members. Dr. Michelle Schweisfurth is a professor of comparative international education at the University of Glasgow, where she both leads the education, leadership, and policy research and teaching group and the early career development for the College of Social Sciences. She is past editor of the journal Comparative Education and past chair of the British Association for International and Comparative Education. Among her many research interests are the pedagogical best practices as traveling policies. So thank you so much, Michelle, for all of your work, and the committees too, in turning around this award. It's a remarkable amount that you all have to do, and you did it in a timely way. They have to work all the way up to that last issue being published, and so I know there's a lot of pressure, and I did it with great care as well. So thank you and the committee for all your hard work, and I will pass the virtual floor over to you.
Thanks very much for that kind introduction, Kara. It's great to see you all here. It's been a really involved process, but a very pleasurable one. I really want to acknowledge the hard work of my colleagues on this committee, Erin Benevot, Radhika Gorur, Tony Verger, and Yun Yu. As the award demands, we, between us, reviewed all of the papers in last year's edition of Comparative Education Review. We scored them, we discussed them, we then shortlisted them, we ranked them, and I'm really pleased to say that there was an unequivocal winner, in the sense that every one of us ranked yours among the top 3, and for a couple of us it was the best paper. So that's quite an achievement, and certainly made the job easier as well, that it was so clear. We really thought your paper made an incredibly important contribution to the field. I've been sitting within DFID FCDO for a couple of years over the last period, and I'm very aware of how the debate around private schooling has been so significant. So I want to congratulate you and announce formally the winning paper. And the authors are Rob Gruijters, Benjamin Alcott, and Pauline Rose, and the paper is called "Do Private Schools Improve Learning Outcomes? Evidence from Within Household Comparisons in East Africa and South Asia." So many, many congratulations to you.
Thank you so much. Shall we give our few words? Is that okay? So we just first of all wanted to really thank the CIES and the journal. I mean, we are really honoured and thrilled. And I have to say, I just can imagine, Michelle, how much work this must have been for all of the colleagues, and really appreciate that not only all the work that you've done, but also the sort of honour of actually us being recognised, our paper being recognised for the work. And I think, you know, with any of this work, it's not just the three authors that are here in the room who have actually been enabled this to happen. So first of all, we are part, and well, Ben has moved to UCL, but I think during the work that we were doing have been part of the REAL Centre, the Research for Equitable Access and Learning Centre at the University of Cambridge. And we really benefit from the sort of thriving environment of working with colleagues on related issues that are really trying to get to the heart of issues around equity in low and low middle income countries, and also working with partners across the world. And I think, you know, we're so privileged to have been working with the People's Action and Learning Network, the PAL network, from the inception of the REAL Centre. So from about 6 years ago when the REAL Centre started, and the data that have been used in this paper are from the PAL network, a really rich open access resource and I think the sort of analysis that's in this paper just shows how valuable that resource is to researchers and to policymakers, because as you're saying, Michelle, the type of analysis that this has enabled us to do really speaks to really key policy issues. So we're really grateful both to CIES and the journal for giving us this opportunity to celebrate the work that we've been doing in partnership, and to celebrate and thank the PAL network for the collaboration. I just want to recognise on the call here we have Ronald and Kenny. I'm going to embarrass you slightly, Ronald and Kenny, because we have a new generation of researchers who are working on issues around private schooling. So Ronald and Kenny are both in the first year of their PhDs. So I'm sure that we're going to be seeing future award winners amongst our colleagues here as well. So thank you for joining us. I'm now going to hand over to Ben, who's going to say a few words.
Thank you, Pauline. Yeah, similar to Paul and I really wanted to thank all of the the selection panel, not of course for choosing us, but for the fantastic amount of work it must take to read through all of these great pieces so thoughtfully. Yeah, it's a tremendous honor, and I'm sorry I'm not at CIES in person this year because I've really loved previous meetings. So as Pauline was saying, as I think Michelle and maybe it was Karen mentioned as well, of course, private schooling is such a contentious subject. When I teach incoming master's students on our programs, I often label it as perhaps the most contentious of all the international education policy subjects. And this piece that we've been working on, Pauline's mentioned sort of the great work coming out of the PAL network, and also the REAL Centre at Cambridge. But it also builds, of course, on a lot of other research in this particular field on the impact of private schools. I know that Pauline was part of a major rigorous literature review done in 2014. And I think it was about 5 years later, there was quite a good review piece came out from the Centre for Global Development, co-authored by Mariam Akmal and others. And one of the things they were saying was 5 years after that rigorous literature review, there'd been, I think, about 70 more studies on private schooling, but most of them were descriptive studies. So I think the thing that what Pauline and I were trying to do in this piece was to try and offer a much more sort of robust argument, using some, I don't know if Rob would agree with this, saying that we use the logic of econometrics. I'm trained in economics. I think Rob's a little bit more of a sociology specialist, but the idea of finding a counterfactual, a really good comparison group. And so that's been the classic problem back and forth for these sort of analyses of private schooling. And I think maybe Rob will speak a little bit more about the research design, but using this fantastic household data from the PAL network, we feel like we've been able to do a pretty good job of that. A lot of the other pieces that use these kind of counterfactual studies, they're often based on quite small scale things like lotteries or voucher schemes, whereas we've got this observational data from children in households right across 5 different countries or 4 different countries in the analysis. So it was a really fun piece to work on with Pauline and Rob, and hopefully has some really interesting insights. But Rob, maybe I should pass over to you to speak a little more about the design and the findings.
Sure, I would be happy to do that. So I'd also like to start out by saying thank you to the CIES and especially the selection committee for all their work on this, and of course for the recognition of our paper. And I'd just like to take you briefly through some of the key findings of our paper, and then potentially broader implications that this might have, including implications for future research. So as Pauline mentioned, we use data from the PAL network, which works in a number of countries in the global south. And the countries that we are looking at are India, Pakistan, Kenya, and Uganda. So 2 South Asian countries and 2 East African countries. And it's important to mention that the Indian and Pakistani data only refer to rural areas, whereas Kenya and Uganda, it is sort of nationally representative. And the overall goal of this paper is to look at the effect of private schools on learning outcomes. And as Ben mentioned, the big challenge there is to appropriately control for family background, including any sort of intangible or unobserved aspects of family background that are very important for learning outcomes. And the advantage of the PAL network data here is, first of all, that it's collected at the household level. And secondly, that it has a very large sample size. So sometimes hundreds of thousands of households in each country. And that enables us to use a design where we compare different children in the same household. So typically this would be siblings, where one child attends a state school and another child attends a private school, and we're comparing the learning outcomes between those 2 children. And surprisingly, it's actually not that uncommon in these 4 countries for children within the same household to attend different schools for various reasons that we explain in the paper. And that is quite fortunate for us, because that enables us to make these kinds of comparisons where we fully control for family backgrounds, including any unobserved aspects of family backgrounds. And the reason for that is obviously that children who are in the same household, by definition, share the same family background, and therefore any effects of family background on learning outcomes is sort of controlled for or held constant by definition in our analysis. And what we do in our empirical analysis is that we compare the estimates from these within household models, which we interpret as a kind of upper bound on the true or causal effect of private schools on learning outcomes, to what we might describe as a naive model that does not control for family backgrounds. And what we see is that once we fully control for family backgrounds, the effect of private schools on learning outcomes is very much reduced. So it's reduced to about half of its original size in India, Kenya, and Uganda, and it's almost completely eliminated, so reduced to 0 in Pakistan. And the remaining effect of private schools that we observe is equivalent to about 1/4 of a standard deviation in these 3 countries, so India, Kenya, and Uganda. And we view this as a relatively modest effect. So as a more concrete illustration, it's equivalent to about a 7 to 9 percentage point increase in the ability to read a very basic story. And as I mentioned before, we interpret this as an upper bound on the true effect or the causal effect because of various assumptions inherent in the model that we explain in the paper. So we estimate that the true effect of private schools is probably not higher than 1/4 of a standard deviation, and it's likely to be even a little bit lower than that. So what do we learn from that? First of all, we say that such a modest effect is nowhere near enough to bring learning outcomes to what we might consider acceptable levels, considering the very low baseline that we observe in these 4 countries. So basically, we conclude that learning outcomes are low on average in public schools, and they are slightly less low in private schools. So that, you might say, is a little bit depressing conclusion. And what we, the broader implication from that, so if we think about this from a policy perspective or from a donor perspective, the real question is whether such a marginal improvement is worth the cost of private schooling. And that cost is, first of all, the burden of fees, which is mostly carried by low-income parents. But we argue that there's other costs as well, which have to do with the broader impact of private schooling on education systems. And what we observe, I believe, in many countries in the global south is the emergence of a fully stratified education system where elites and middle classes send their children to relatively expensive private schools. Those who live just above the poverty line send their children to low-fee private schools, and it's mainly the poor who attend state schools. And this is, first of all, likely to have negative implications for the quality of public schooling, because it kind of becomes an education provider of last resort that is only frequented by those who cannot afford private schools. And it's also deeply unmeritocratic, because children receive the quality of education that their parents can afford. And we feel that that is obviously not a desirable situation, and we argue that on balance, if we look at this from a policy perspective, the learning benefits of private schooling are relatively modest, and they are unlikely to outweigh these social costs that I've described just now and that we describe more extensively in the paper. In terms of academic research, we argue that future research should pay more attention to the political economy of private schooling. And this is a topic that we hope to take up ourselves in upcoming research projects, and we hope that others will do so as well. So we think it's still a very vibrant research area, and yeah, we look forward to working with others. And yeah, thank you very much. I'm not sure if we have time for questions, or should we leave it at this?
Thanks very much for that very detailed and clear explanation of the paper. As I said, you know, the rigor evident in the quantitative analysis, the use of a really outstanding data set, and above all, the kind of implications for policy in this highly contested area are all so important. But I also want to acknowledge another paper, which we wanted to give an honorable mention, a very different kind of paper, a much more theoretical paper, a review of the field, really. We gave an honorable mention to Gerald Letendre for his work on teachers in neo-institutional and world culture theory, which is a very different kind of paper, but also very important, and you know, kind of working in the same space around schooling, and also with some really interesting things to say. So big congratulations again. It's great to hear that you're continuing this important work, and we look forward to seeing more papers from you in the future. And we'll just bring Karen and Cara back in for the final wrap up.
Yes. Congratulations, Rob, Pauline, and Benjamin. Fabulous work, and I'm looking forward to this next generation as well. So thanks, Pauline, for highlighting them. It'll be great to see the next generation come through.
And I concur. Congratulations to all of you. And we're so lucky to have great submissions to our journal, and therefore we can have wonderful awardees. So congratulations to everybody, and we hope to see you next year at CIES.